everybody, and welcome to the Feminine Principle Podcast, astrology for authentic living. My name is Mel with Energetic Principles.
And I'm Shawna with Neo Feminine Astrology.
And in this episode, we will be discussing the astrology for the week of December 25th and what we have titled Reframing Reality. The purpose of this podcast is to give inspiration and guidance for this week with real-life examples of what to expect.
The three major aspects that we'll talk about today are Venus conjunct Saturn in Capricorn, which we're calling reality check. We'll also talk about the first quarter moon in Aries, which we've titled Onward. And then lastly, we'll talk about Mars trine Neptune, which is about creative motion. So as always, please remember that some of these aspects will influence you more than others based on what's literally happening in your life right now and your personal astrological makeup. So notice what resonates with you most and always use your intuition and logic to decide what's best for you.
Yes, because you know you best. So yeah, Shawna, let's kick off this week's episode, which is the last of the year. So this is a final hurrah to 2017 from us TFP people. But here's a quick rundown of the moon's path through the zodiac and some other minor aspects, although I don't think we have any this week. But let's get into this for all you astro geeks out there. So we actually start off the week and the Xmas holiday. So we do have Christmas on Monday if you are subscribe to some Christmas cheer. So our lunar lady is going to be fully in her waxing cycle at that point. She's actually going to be teetering on the edge of spiritual Pisces before moving into feisty Aries later in the day, or at least in North America, that is. And then she's going to make her way to the first quarter moon, which of course we're going to talk about in much more detail later on in the episode. About midweek, she moves into stable Taurus, where she'll remain until Saturday, when she then moves into communicative Gemini. So, Shawna, please share who we're featuring for this week's quotes.
So this week features quotes and inspiration from the American photographer, portrait photographer, Annie Leibovitz. And she's known for her no-nonsense but striking portraits. You may know her from, she gained a lot of recognition for the photograph that she took of John Lennon the day that he was assassinated. And she also became the first woman to hold an exhibition at Washington's National Portrait Gallery in 1991. And so she's a great symbol for this week because she has this very creative, intuitively creative style, but she has such a strength about her as well, such a striking determination kind of energy.
Yes, I love her and her work. She's pretty amazing, and she definitely is a personality and like a no nonsense kind of no nonsense kind of person, but also very just receptive to like you said, her approach to art. It's so interesting. Like I saw something recently. I think it was like an ad on YouTube for like a master class she's doing right now, which is kind of a big thing, you know, to study under her is a big deal if you're a photographer. But I think she was commenting, she's like, what, you know, if you're focused on like the technical aspects of your gear, you know, you're not doing it right. Like it's like, it's not about the tech. It's about what you see behind that camera. It's like what that captures in a person and being able to like kind of roll with that intuitively to catch that moment. So I love that. I love that we're featuring her this week. It's a good choice, Shawna.
Definitely. And so that being said, we're excited to jump into these transits. But one last note before we do, a shout out to all of our patrons. We appreciate you so much.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We need you.
Yeah. And thanks for getting on board with us this year. It's been a really fun journey. And so if you don't already know, you can become a patron of this podcast to show your appreciation. And then you also get our super cool show notes every single week with all of the details of each episode. And so this includes the specific dates of the transits that we talk about, the tarot cards that Mel pulls, the quotes that I select, the reflection questions, and the weekly action item. Oh my goodness, all the things.
All the things. But wait, there's more. There's more.
And then as a special gift, you also get our Astro Basics cheat sheet that that is a nice little quick reference guide for the planets and the signs and putting everything all together. So it's something nice to reference just for yourself as you listen, or if you want to look back on things later. And so to become a patron, you can go to feminineprinciplepodcast.podbean.com, or you can just find out more and connect with us on Facebook and Instagram under Feminine Principle Podcast.
Yes, we will be there. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And we are working on a couple things coming forward into the new year. So stay tuned for that. Mm-hmm. Then we're also going to be hosting that full moon live event, right, Shawna?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that will be this Friday, December 29th at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. I'm really excited about this. We'll talk about the upcoming full moon that is on the 1st of the year, and then also we'll do a little recap of best hits of 2017 transits, and then a little mini forecast for the year ahead for 2018 as well.
Yes, I think it's going to be a really fun time as we look back and then look forward. We're going to strain our necks doing this, but I think it'll be good just to recap everything and kind of bring in that new year. I can't believe we're going to have a full moon on New Year's Day.
How cool is that?
That's pretty cool. And we're glad to be able to talk about it while it's brewing. So yes, once again, December 29th at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. And that's going to be a Friday. So we hope to see you there. Mm-hmm. So shall we get to it?
Yes.
Let's get to it here. Okay, so we have our first transit that's up to bat, and that is Venus, who is going to be conjuncting Saturn in Capricorn, and what we are labeling reality check. And so some exacts on that. Venus will make her conjunction to Saturn on Monday, December 25th at 9:55 a.m. Pacific time, which is 5:55 p.m. Universal time, and Tuesday the 26th at 3:55 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that conjunction is going to happen at 0 degrees Capricorn. So Shawna, kick us in with your first quote.
So this again is by the photographer Annie Leibovitz. She says, "I didn't want to let women down. One of the stereotypes I see breaking is the idea of aging and older women not being beautiful." Mm-hmm. And so I thought this was so perfect. If you don't know of her, she's a mature woman. I don't know how old she is, but she's got this really beautiful flowing white gray hair, and she has sparkly eyes, and just like she's what our modern culture would deem as a woman that is older or more mature, but she has such life in her and she has such spirit. And I think that that's perfect for this particular transit because Venus and Saturn, Venus is about beauty and love and attraction. It's that energy of something that we find beautiful. And then with Saturn, Saturn is about tradition. It's about wisdom that comes from experience. And so these two together, there is this essence of a love of wisdom, a love of maturity.
I love it, and it's such a great quote. For this this transit, obviously, and just to represent her and represent actually our society, who is increasingly, bringing these stereotypes onto us women, where it used to be where the the wisdom of the crone was greatly accepted into the society, and now we battle with the idea of like. Just, even me as a Capricorn moon, I just, as I get older, I just look at myself in the mirror sometimes and I'm like, who is this person? Where did this wrinkle come from? How did I,
Yep.
It's part of it. And I'm not even that old yet, I'm inching to 40 close, but it's something you realize, and it has this mortality effect to it. But I think our culture plays into it even more to where it's kind of disheartening. But it shouldn't be, because there really is a beauty to a woman with wisdom and a woman who's, experienced life. And I think that this kind of goes along with it. But you said you didn't know how old she was, so I just ran her chart real quick just to take a look.
Naturally.
This time I'm like, I'm not going to ask Shawna to do it. I'm always like, Shawna, can you find it out? But she's a Libra, October 2nd, 49. So she is 68 years old. And just as youthful as ever. That's the thing, is like, when you embrace the idea of just getting, like a fine wine, finer with age, like you don't, you keep that youthful spirit within you. I think so. Aquarius moon too. So that's interesting. Yeah. Explains a little bit. So, but yeah.
Yeah. And what I noticed too is, I notice a lot lately when women make comments about their age, and because I'll hear women say something about like comparing themselves to someone that's younger, like, oh, I forgot blah, 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 I'm getting old, or, my wrinkles, or, things aren't working as good as they used to. And it makes me really sad, because I think that is the shadow side of Saturn, to relate that back to astrology is, the shadow side of Saturn is, feeling sad and fearful, and kind of like a lack of hope. And what I want for all of us is, I think that a lot of this comes in because in our society, we fear death, we fear aging, we fear anything that is not keeping us preserved, like pristinely preserved.
Or we're trying to keep ourselves preserved. But that's the thing, is like everything, like all the plastic surgeries, the Botoxes, this, that, and not that it's a wrong thing, but it's just interesting how that never really existed until this moment in time, in the last, 30 plus years. So,
yeah. And I think it really comes down to the motivation. It's like, okay, why are we doing the things that we're doing? And I think that a lot of it is because our society tells us what beauty looks like. And, I really love the idea of embracing this softer side of Saturn, where it's like there can be this element of that crone stage, like you were talking about, Mel, where there is age, but there's also wisdom and a sense of strength that comes with that, a sense of like being really solid in a person's individuality.
Yeah. And that only comes with age. Like you only, you step into your skin more and more, regardless of how much it sags.
That. Oh my
gosh. And that's the thing, is like, I would rather be comfortable in my own skin and maybe have some wrinkles and some health problems here and there, than to be like a fresh, young, flighty thing that just hasn't. That's the thing, is like, most women, especially if you are not working from a superficial place, you embrace your age. Like that's just, you might question it at times where you're like, I didn't, all of a sudden you have a Saturn transit over your first house, like I did. And I'm like, how the hell did I just age like 5 years in like 20 days? What happened? And that's true. That's true. But I wouldn't change it for the world. Like, to be like, you want to be 25 again? I'm like, no, hell no. And there's nothing wrong with being 25 either. That's the thing, is it's stages in life, and there's like, we can reflect upon the past, but there's no need to go back. It's very important to live in the moment now. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, so like to expand upon this and what it could actually feel like too, I really like what you said, Mel, about there's this feeling of moving from insecurity to security. When we have a Saturn transit, in general, when a person has a Saturn transit to their natal chart. And so I'm wondering, like, I don't know, I'm wondering if that's how we may feel this week, if we may feel a sense of moving from uncertainty and insecurity, especially moving off of the Mercury retrograde period to moving to like, hey, like, okay, I got this. I know what I want. A certain level of like making like, I don't know if I want to say making a cut, but like drawing a boundary on what is okay and what is not okay, and having a strong sense of security with that.
Yeah. And like we have it titled a reality check. In order to get that security, you have to tap into what's real, essentially. And I think it's very interesting having the reality check. At the same time, we're going to have Mars trining Neptune,
Yes.
which we're going to talk about later in the episode. But we have some conflicting things here, and it's a pile up. All these transits are really happening in the first half of the week, so you can expect a lot of the. If you listen to this on Sunday when it first comes out, like that's probably when you're going to be feeling a lot of the Venus Saturn. Or pretty much Sunday through, I would say Tuesday, as we get through this first quarter moon that we're going to talk about as well. So Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, we're really going to be feeling the bulk of this week, I think, is where we're going to be, especially with that Aries moon. But let's talk about some exacts happening while Venus is conjuncting Saturn on that Monday on Christmas. It makes me think of like a little kid that like wanted something real bad and it just doesn't come through, kind of thing. Like I know that's sad. But sometimes, that's the thing, is sometimes life hands us a bitter pill, and to be honest, Venus conjunct Saturn can be one of those moments. Just because it has like different, obviously it's going to have different rays of intensity depending on where it falls in your chart, in what house, what does that look like for you? But in my experience, with seeing other people with that chart, or people that have synastry with other people with Venus conjunct Saturn, sometimes, it's a glue that holds together, but there's some bitter pills get thrown in there from time to time again. So let's talk about some specs here. So when the conjunction is exact, it's actually, we're still in the late degrees of Pisces, the moon is. And it's once again conjunct Chiron. I think in the last episode we were talking about how the moon at that point was squaring Chiron, and we're having like Chiron issues that wounded, bringing up, certain things that might be painful for us so that we can move through them, kind of situation. And then that moon will, of course, then move into Aries, and we're going to talk about that first quarter here in a little while. And then is going to square this energy. And I think that's where it's almost like I feel like the Venus conjunct Saturn and this any type of fear that might come up around like Venus related issues is going to happen maybe on Monday or maybe the day after, because transits usually are felt as they apply, as they move towards, but a lot of times the manifestation of what happens as they separate. And so I'm feeling, I don't know about you, Shawna, but I'm feeling kind of Tuesday as does that make sense? I'm rambling a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think this is the thing, is I think it totally depends. And I think that the fact that we have the first quarter moon in Aries around the same time, and then Aries, by sign, it's going to square the Venus-Saturn conjunction, because Aries squares Saturn. And so it seems to me as though everything may come to a head, so to speak, maybe around Tuesday. Monday, Tuesday, basically, I'm thinking. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we don't know when events are going to happen. The biggest thing that we can do is understand what's really happening underneath the surface. And I think what's happening underneath the surface here is that there's a call to step up to the plate. There's a call to face reality. Like just the fact that, okay, number one, it's Venus Saturn. So it's like, okay, in Capricorn, what are the facts? What's the reality of the situation is like the nature of this aspect. And then the fact that it's a first quarter moon, which is about, like staking your claim or drawing boundaries or, deciding to make a compromise or deciding not to make a compromise. It's very, it's about meeting conflict head on. And so I'm like, okay, how do we make sure that we do that in a way that feels good and honors our values, Venus, our values? Yeah.
And I totally agree with that, because it's like you said, we don't know what's going to go down. We don't know even when quite it's going to go down. But the fact that we can be aware that something might go down is going to help us in the long run here. So that's pretty much what we're talking about here, because, it comes in there, Saturn, Venus conjunct at 0 degrees Capricorn, which 0 degrees in Wateki's system is once again all about boundaries, where we lay down boundaries within ourselves and then outside of us, how we communicate those to other people. And here we are talking about relationships, and probably serious relationships, or thinking about getting serious relationships, because when Saturn comes around, we are usually talking about commitment, and so Venus conjunct Saturn a lot of times can, bring up fears of commitment, where we might be a little shy about, committing to a relationship, or feeling, we don't know if this should be, there's a gravity to it that happens. And another thing with Venus conjunct Saturn is, if you're already in relationships, say you in a serious relationship already, maybe we're getting confronted, since it's a new cycle, essentially, with Venus and Saturn, the idea of control and how balanced that is in our relationships, because that's another Capricornian Saturn type of flavor is, who's got control, who's directing the relationship, pulling the punches, so that can come up at this time too. Possibly, especially in Capricorn, because when everything's in Capricorn, we're all going to want control. It's like, So.
Yeah. And I think it's like, okay, how do we make sure that we take responsibility for ourselves, that we try to control our lives instead of the life of someone else around us? Or if someone is trying to control us, how do we be like, no, you're not allowed to do that. I'm the boss of me. I am in charge of taking care of myself. That kind of thing.
I know. Don't you remember from Sun trine Uranus? I'm the boss of me. But no, it's true. And this is a time when our partnerships can really be tested on how firm the foundation is, because that's another thing with Saturn is it's like it likes a concrete foundation. If it's not, it's going to throw little hiccups in the way, or things that can challenge us to, like this transit is called reality check, because if things aren't built quite right, we might get like I said earlier, like a little bit of a bitter pill. But whether you're in a long-term relationship or you're just meeting someone, Shawna and I were talking about earlier, how it seems like all these people are coming out of the woodwork, meeting people in Mercury retrograde. We're taping this at Mercury retrograde. By the time Mercury will be direct when you listen to this episode, but we were just talking about it. It was kind of funny. So
yeah, and just personal note for to see the contrast is when I had a transit of Saturn transiting Saturn conjunct my Venus was around the time when I got married. And and so that I think speaks to, like you're talking about, Mel, the gravity of a situation. Like Saturn Venus is, it's very much an aspect that relates to the feeling of a long-term union of marriage. At the same time, when I had my Saturn return, I got divorced. So it's like, it's a make or break aspect, I think, in a certain way, because it asks us to look at the foundation. It asks us to look at, okay, is this strong? Is this sturdy? If not, it needs to be rebuilt, or it needs to be shifted, or it needs to go. And that can look so many different ways depending on what's going on in our life at the moment.
Yes, that's very true. Because and depending on the level of the relationship, because a lot of times, say you have a new relationship starting out, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, what have you, when we're feeling our relationships, that's kind of when we're the most vulnerable, in a sense, and we might have feelings of inadequacy, because that's another thing that comes up with Saturn. Is like, you don't know if you could do it, or you don't know if they're gonna like it, or it's just kind of what happens. so you might be tested with that. But, I think playing into that Aries first quarter that we're eventually going to talk about, even though we keep referencing it, might give us a little courage in that department. But but ultimately, like when Saturn comes around, we're very aware of our responsibilities. And if, with Venus, our responsibilities to others. So say you have people in your life that you don't even, they're not necessarily your romantic partner or even your best friend. Just say the people that you work with, or, like, what's your responsibility to these people? How much, it's awareness of time too. How much time are you giving to other people? Cause that's another thing is like Venus conjunct Saturn. You might be like, am I just, spending all my time, worrying on working on other people's stuff. And like, I'm losing control of my own responsibilities or what I feel responsible for in my own life. These are types of things that can come up too. So lots of different manifestations, I would say.
Definitely.
So let's talk about these tarot cards because it's so interesting. The tarot poll this week, just a note, I feel like the tarot seem to have combined or switched the two first segments, or because they're so close to each other, like one kind of made sense for one and one made sense for the other, but they're in total switch. But anyways, so for Venus and Saturn conjunct in Capricorn, I drew the Knight of Wands as the focus and the Nine of Cups as the grounding. And so, if I'm gonna pick from the high side immediately, like I would like to say, let's start high.
Yeah.
I would say it's like about acting boldly on your passions for greater fulfillment, because that Nine of Cups is very much about fulfillment, finding what makes one emotionally happy or reaching that place. But that Knight at the same time is. It does act boldly. And so there's a fine line with how one acts in order to fulfill what it is emotionally they want. And that's where the tricky part comes in. Like the high side is like, yes, we're going forward with our passions. We're going to, we're going to get ourselves to this greater land of fulfillment, which is totally possible. And I'm hoping we're all working towards that. But at the same time, we can look at, that Knight is very restless and can express itself from the place of personal desire and say we haven't really refined in that Saturn term, refined how to express ourselves. So we might be overly brusque or a little, or we act a little hastily right now without the forethought needed, because we're going like, I want this. This is what I desire most. And there could be a greed element from that. And then here we are, we've said something and we're like, be careful what you wish for, because if you act on it without it being well thought out, we've all been there. Need I continue on what happens when that happens? But anyways, there's just some of the format or some of the things that I think of these two cards playing together and really playing into that first quarter move, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm reminded of, a few different things with this. Mm-hmm. I think number one, these cards definitely speak of the possibility that we may be feeling hasty. We may be feeling like a sense of urgency, like we want to move, we want to get the thing done. We want to act on that Aries moon that's happening. And I think that these cards are a reminder of like, hey, maybe that's not the best way to go. Chill yourself a little bit. And I think a part of that is because we're still so fresh in Capricorn season. Yes. Like this conjunction is literally happening at 0 degrees of Capricorn. It's like the very, very, very beginning. And so we're still... we're like, whoa, what is this Capricorn thing that's happening? How do I move into this Capricorn energy? We're figuring it out. And it reminds me of a talk that I went to a few months ago. It was by a gal that's local in San Diego. She does body work, but a very big focus on the nervous system and with women. Her name is Kimberly Johnson. And she was giving a talk on the nervous system and fight or flight or freeze and how we define boundaries based on our nervous system. And she was saying how people that that don't have strong boundaries as like a natural tendency. They're more submissive by nature. When they start to try to define their boundaries, it's kind of like a figuring out process. Like they might kind of like not do it. And then they might go overboard, be like, no, like, when someone's like, hey, says hi, they're like, no. And they freak out. And so it's like, I think that we're kind of figuring out like that. It makes me think of this Knight of Wands card. It's like, there's lots of dynamic energy, and maybe we want to draw boundaries, and we want to figure out how to commit and when and where to commit. But it might feel kind of like it comes in spurts, so to speak. And so I think that we need to learn how to be a little patient with that this week.
Yes. And who knows patience better than old Saturn? That's the irony, is it's like, beware of that impatience, because Saturn essentially asks us to go slowly, especially when he's at 0 degrees. Making that conjunction, like you were just saying, and then the 9 can be a little self-indulgent at times. And we are approaching Aries first quarter. So I totally agree with that. And I wish I would have loved to see that talk on the nervous system. Because that fascinates me. So you'll have to let me know if she does something like that again, or if
yeah, you would have dug it. I'll have to send you the link to it. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Any of you people out there have strong Uranus in your chart, that type of energy, as I do, you'll notice that the nervous system can take a beating sometimes, or is more heightened, just because there's kind of like that electric energy. So any management of that, I'm greatly appreciated. So yes. Okay. So, well, let's have our reflection questions here so we can move on to talk about that first quarter. So some reflection questions, regarding Venus conjunct Saturn. I would ask myself, how stable are my relationships? Are there any fears of commitment or feelings of inadequacy to be worked through? Am I communicating my needs accurately? I would ask, when I relate with others, how balanced is the power dynamic? Is control equally distributed, or does it lean in one direction more than another? And then lastly, I would ask, can I act on solidifying my desires? With a new cycle starting, can I devote myself to greater fulfillment of my own personal wishes?
Nice.
And that's the high side. All right. So let's move on to our next highly awaited segment. And that is that first quarter moon in Aries, and what we are titling Onward. I just had this vision of like the spear, the warrior, onward. And so some exacts on that first quarter is going to happen on Tuesday, the 26th at 1:20 a.m. Pacific time, which is 9:20 a.m. Universal time, and 7:20 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that square will happen at 4 degrees Aries. So Shawna, kick us in with your next quote.
So this again is by Annie Leibovitz. You have to trust in what you think. If you splinter yourself and try to please everyone, you can't. And so I like this short and sweet little quote for this first quarter moon in Aries, because Aries really is about the individual self. It's about pleasing oneself, really, because at the end of the day, Aries is about building a healthy sense of ego through meeting challenge. And I like that she says, if you splinter yourself, like Aries is like, no, there's no splintering. I am going towards the thing that I'm doing. I don't even really know where I'm going, but I'm going to get there like right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that we may be feeling that, especially since it's a first quarter moon and it's waxing, it's growing, it's very dynamic and forward moving.
Well, and I love this quote, Shawna. It's so funny because this quote really ties into this first quarter in Aries, and it also ties into that Venus conjunct Saturn and the fact that they're happening at the same time, because we were just talking about Saturn bringing up responsibilities to other people. And so talking about splinting yourself, trying to please everyone, and you can't. So I think this first quarter moon in Aries is really going to give us, challenge ourselves emotionally with our, like you said, our own desires and what it is we're going for. And, even if we don't have that end result, like we have to get ourselves on the right trajectory to do that. And so I think with that Venus conjunct Saturn, basically at the same time, because here we're talking about a first quarter moon, at least over here in Pacific time, 1:20 a.m. in the morning on Tuesday. When do you think we're going to be feeling that? Probably Monday, or Monday, or like early in the morning on Tuesday as we wake up, which is interesting because it's so early in the degrees, at 4 degrees. So if we were to use Witekki's system, it's interesting because 4 degrees is a breakthrough step, and it's like the consciousness of where I belong type of thing. And that's where we break down and we break through because we're reassessing, where we truly fit, and sometimes we have to break down, and especially it's the early degree in that first part of the energy. And that's supported by the Aries moon that gives us the time to really process what it is our own self wants. And I think that's kind of tying into that Knight of Wands that we were just talking about earlier, and why we might jump the gun, so to speak, because like you were saying, Shawna, like there's no splintering yourself when it comes to Aries energy. It's like, no, I'm just going. Like, this is just, it's like someone, this is what I imagine. It's like being on roller skates at the top of a hill. And you like start to move just a little, and then there's no stopping at that point. You just keep on going. And so I kind of have that image right now. And because there lacks those Saturn breaks in a sense, perhaps, we might fall and hurt ourselves.
Or run into a tree.
Run into a tree. That's very Saturn. You can't move that tree. That's funny.
Well, and as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing that this first quarter moon is very much tied into the Venus Saturn transit, because it's within just it's happening so close in time. It's like Monday, Tuesday, and then even within degrees, the exactness of the first quarter moon is within just a few degrees of the Venus Saturn conjunction. And so it's like where like there's going to be some type of or possibly it feels as though there may be something that we need to confront, whether that is an external circumstance or a limitation of our time, even if that isn't a physical situation, even if it's just something that's like an internal frustration and we need to make a decision about it, it feels as though there's something that we need to stand up for, that we need to say, or that we need to do.
Well, exactly. And here we are because we're talking about a first quarter moon, and just to refresh our listeners out there, if you're not quite familiar with what first quarter means, that's that first 90 degrees square that the moon makes from the sun. And it is a challenging aspect. It's a time to take action in some way. But a lot of times we take action, especially in this Aries type of energy, and maybe we're taking action not as well thought out. Or, that's the thing, is it's Aries by nature is instinctual. Like, that's the thing. They're not thinking it out. Like, you're thinking it through it as you're going through it.
We can think later. We don't need to think about anything right now.
Yes. Every fire sign will tell you that, basically. Like, act now, think later.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what makes it fun, because it really is like the Aries really embraces the power of now, like, essentially. And so being in first quarter, a lot of times we come up with certain conflicts because a square energy, that 90-degree energy, is a conflicting energy. And that's why a lot of times we have to take action in this moment, is because we are faced with some type of conflict or some type of drama or something we have to engage with, essentially. Or certain ideals that we have might not pan out. And so we almost have to make a deal with ourselves in the moment. And so this is all factoring in during this first quarter. And so I think with the fact that it's in Aries and the idea that we're having this Venus conjunct Saturn right before it, and how much Aries really just loves its own company, or kind of needs its own company, because independent action is essential to an Aries. So I'm wondering if our emotions are challenged in some way, because it's usually what happens during first quarter. If maybe we have to, have some solo time, like roll solo right now, to where we just connect with ourselves enough to really understand, where we want to take action, especially within the climate that we're in.
Yeah. And it's the timing of all of this is really interesting too, with the holiday. And so
I know.
I mean, a lot of us may, whether you celebrate Christmas or not, or, you celebrate a different kind of holiday or you don't celebrate at all, it is this time where we're either surrounded by people or maybe not surrounded by people, depending on what's happening. And so, it's like, how do we navigate through all of that, and how do we ultimately take care of ourselves, I think, is what this combination is asking of us.
It just dawned on me, Shawna, that I just remembered my boyfriend, Stu, was saying that so we're going to have Christmas together on Monday, right? But he has to leave immediately, like super early the next morning, to do a job in LA for several days. So that's like just a literal manifestation of this. So I'm going to be on my own, I'm going to have the house to myself. I'm going to be doing my, own thing, blah, blah, blah. And so, something simple as that.
That's so funny. That's ironic, because my family, we're getting together on Christmas Eve day, because the kids will, be elsewhere on Christmas Day. And so Christmas Day, I literally don't know what I'm doing yet, because I'm doing family stuff the day before. And so then on Christmas and the day after, I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? And
how funny.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny.
Well, we're going to be on our own, really, in true Aries style, be on our own. And so it could be something like that, and who knows what's going to come down the pipeline as we get to this moment. We just have our plans set in place, as most people do, especially around the holiday. But we do have that square to Saturn and Venus involved. And so I imagine even if I'm not feeling some challenge right now, there's probably going to be new considerations that come up in this time that I will be considering in that moment of that I have to myself. But I think a lot of what's tying into these aspects to me, especially with first quarter moon in Aries being on 4 degrees, a breakthrough step, tying in with this conjunction of Venus and Saturn, I think it's an ultimate test in some respect to emotional resilience. A little bit, like how resilient are our emotions, and how able are we to take lemons and make lemonade, in a sense, because, it's Saturn. It's Saturn, essentially. And so sometimes, and with Venus, when Venus is all, about sharing with others and not the communication, that's part of it, Mercury and Venus together, but how we, especially expressing feelings, it might be a little hard right now with that Saturn Venus conjunction, or we might do so brashly with this Aries moon kind of thing. So that's why I think these few days to roll solo, to really experience the self, and to tap into your own emotional resilience, because it says a lot. A lot of people, especially in relationships, can be codependent too. So to go on your own and take a moment for yourself and just remember who you are for a second, so that you can commit to your relationship and from a wholer perspective. it can be hard to do as well. And you need emotional resilience in order to like peel yourself away from someone else, or at least some, not everybody, but there's a lot of that dynamic out there in relationships just in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think that our comfort level with independence, the dynamic of our relationship to others, and then how we fit in as an individual is going to be illuminated at this point. It's like, how do we connect in relationships? And is that, does that work? Is it healthy? And not necessarily like, is everything smooth on the outside? I think conflict, like we may see like there's conflict and conflict is okay, but how do we move through that? How do we move through whatever is happening in our relationships and then our relationship to ourselves in a way that is responsive versus reactive?
Yes. And that's the thing, is when the moon's involved, it can be reactive. It's a reactive self. Like that's essentially kind of the, it's not the sole purpose of the moon, but typically say we're in a conversation with another person, especially if we are emotionally attached to an idea or something that we're communicating, that's when our moon takes over. The moon and Mercury work together, but essentially the moon is driving that bus. And so that's where we get that reactive self that comes out. And, as I called it before, like a behavior motivator. It's like basically what motivates our reaction and our behavior towards something. And right now we're going to feel a little fiery. We're going to, Aries is an interesting energy to work through. But say there's something, say you have to get through something in life, or there's some type of crisis that crops up in a sense. This is the type of moon that will help you get through it, essentially.
Definitely.
So, all right. Well, let's talk about these tarot cards because they can seem a little disheartening, but we're gonna move through this, people. And so I drew the 5 of Pentacles as the focus and the 5 of Cups as the grounding. And first and foremost, a 5 is both 2 5s. This is transition here. We're transitioning, and we clearly are transitioning because we have so many planets that are now moving into Capricorn. And so we're going to feel that anyways. But with this first quarter moon, and having the 5 of Pentacles and the 5 of Cups, I think that really reinforces the idea of this is a time of soul searching, because we are in that transition. And there's chances are there may have been a disappointment that we have to process in some way. And a lot of times when we're disappointed about something, we may feel alone, or emotionally wounded in some way. And we have to work through those feelings. And I think with that Aries moon, it's kind of asking us to maybe process this solo, essentially. So, if you're separated from a loved one, like myself, I don't even know what's happening coming up, but I'll be, separated from my loved one. So it's a great time. Whenever you're in separation, it's a great time to reevaluate a situation, just because, like the old motto goes, like distance makes the heart grow fonder, right? And so by giving some distance to process things, especially emotionally, then we have a clearer channel, I think, into what it is we truly desire, want to put our energy towards, and kind of reaffirms those relationships in a way. But that's just some facets of the 5 of Pentacles and the 5 of Cups. But I'd love to hear what you think, Shawna.
Yeah, so I think these cards definitely speak to some feeling of loss or disappointment. And I don't know it might be a literal loss or a situation that doesn't work out. It might just be that whatever is happening doesn't meet our expectation in some way, which, that sucks. But at the same time, I'm really curious about the 5 of Cups, because the 5 of Cups, it's this person that's looking down at some spilled cups, like they're turned over, and he's like so sad. and he's all alone and he's all by himself, but behind him are these two other cups that are upright. And so I think there's like, okay, yes, there may be possibly loss or disappointment. And I think that definitely ties in with the Venus-Saturn transit that we were talking about earlier. So like these are all kind of commingled, but at the same time, like there's something there that maybe we're not looking at that's still a benefit to us. And it makes me think of like, our perspective, is the cup, is it half full or is it half empty? And how are we orienting ourselves? And we may have a tendency this week to focus on what it is that isn't working, but I would encourage us to maybe, turn around and see the things that are working at the same time, because this card to me says that there are other things that we have as resources for us.
Yes. And I think that's a great piece of advice because, it's the middle of something. It's not necessarily the end of something, and things are in transition. It's the 5. And like you were saying with the image of, 3 cups are spilled over and 2 are still, full to the brim. We have to focus on what is still left for us in any situation, or not even in any situation, because sometimes the situation, maybe there's nothing left for us there, but we can't get focused on the fact that there's nothing left there. We still have these 2 cups that are full in this other direction, like we have so many things going on with our lives that even when we're down in the dumps about something that it could be trivial or could be very extreme, there's always some goodness that is still out there. Like you always have to look, but it's hard to look for those 2 cups, because when here we're talking about an imbalance, 3 cups are spilled over, only 2, there's more spilled than there, so I think I think especially with the 5s involved, I think for us, a lot of us are probably going to be re-examining priorities and how they might be changing. And that's how we find ourselves in this transition. So hopefully we can, take some time to, accept what is, because that's part of it. You have to accept what is, and then move away from any worry that you might be having, or if anxiety creeps up, or if you find yourself in a position of being a martyr in a situation too, because sometimes that happens as well. But as long as we keep in mind, this shall pass. Once again, that emotional resilience, I think, can come in and help us move through any transition we might be going through right now. Because like the 5 of Pentacles, and it's so interesting, we have all these planets in Capricorn, because the 5 of Pentacles can talk about material change as well. That results in some sort of hard time, especially since we have that moon square to Saturn. So, you can even have, in Venus, we could have financial hardships that bring grief. It doesn't even have to be relationships. There could be some financial things that come. We might feel a lack of something in our lives, whether that's the relationship or some money, or maybe even a connection with spirit, because that's a lot of times with 5 of Pentacles is, we're a little disconnected with spirit, and that's why we have that poverty kind of consciousness in a sense. So I'm just hoping that Aries moon, whatever crisis or transition we're working through, will help us deal with this from a courageous place, I hope.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, like you say, Mel, is just to remember that this too shall pass. Whatever hardship it is that we're receiving at the moment, it's not forever. Yes.
It's never forever. The only way it's forever is if you make it forever. And that's why it's so important to move on. And so some questions to take away for this first quarter moon in Aries. I would ask myself, with this volatile emotional atmosphere that we are moving through right now, do I need some time to myself to process? Can I honor my own need for independence so I can get clearer on the actions I want to take? I would ask, if I come across any sadness, disappointment, or hardship early in the week, how can I make lemons into lemonade? Can I roll through the punches of change and look out in a positive way for my own best interest? And then I know that was the very Aries right there. And then lastly, I would ask, how emotionally resilient am I? Even in times of struggle, can I rise to the occasion and push through? Do I have the courage to stay calm and carry on?
Nice.
Questions of an Aries. All right, so let's move into our last transit we're featuring this week, and that is Mars, who's going to be making a trine to Neptune on what we are titling Creative Motion. So some exacts on that. Mars is going to trine Neptune on Wednesday, December 27th at 10 p.m. Pacific time, which is Thursday the 28th at 6 a.m. Universal time, and then 4 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that trine is going to happen at 11 degrees Scorpio and Pisces. So Shawna, kick us in with your last quote.
So this again is by Annie Leibovitz. In a portrait, you have room to have a point of view. The image may not be literally what's going on, but it's representative. A thing you see in my pictures is that I was not afraid to fall in love with these people. And I saw this quote and I thought, oh, this is so perfect for Mars trine Neptune for a few different reasons. So number one, Neptune is very much about art and media, and this includes photography, and it suits photography very well. The other thing that's interesting is Neptune is about symbolism and archetypes, and this process of like one thing, such as an image, being used as a symbol for something else. Like that's that's essentially what art is we express ourselves through symbols. We use a color or a shape or even an image of a person, and that person like shaped and framed in a certain way to convey a message, to convey a feeling. And I think I love what she says here about that she wasn't afraid to fall in love with these people. And I think that speaks to the Neptune capacity for compassion, to connect with someone, to connect with their story, even if we don't know them at a personal level just yet. And the fact that Mars is involved here, there's like this initiation to get in there and to create that fantasy, and to fall in love with symbolism in any way that comes into our life.
I love it, Shawna. And I connect with it very personally because for a couple of reasons. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I originally, I've had a few dreams to be something in my life. And my dream in my teens and through much of my 20s was to be a photographer.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, even like my high school class ring, like one side was an eagle, one side was a camera. Like,
oh my gosh.
So so a lot of the 2000s I spent selling vintage clothing on eBay. And the best part of it, the most important part of the business, but the part I derived the most pleasure from was taking the photos. And I mean, I glammed it out. Like I would pay models. It was a full-on photography setup. I had all my flashes, all that kind of thing. And I would take these clothes. It's so crazy. I would find beauty in the clothes and the person within these photos. Like I would have models, a lot of times the models would come to me because they would see my work and they just wanted to shoot with me because they loved the photos and the glamour. And I kind of have a wild style of dressing things. It's kind of wacky and fun. And so these people would show up at my doorstep, and a lot of times, especially a Scorpio rising, I'm going to look them over a few times. I'm going to be like, how's this going to turn out? And it's so funny, like those preconceived judgments of beauty. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know, these people do modeling, blah, blah, blah. And then I would take a photo of them. And I would take a photo of them and I would dress them in an outfit that you'd be like, you're looking at the person and it's kind of questionable. Then I took a picture of it and it was like magic. All of a sudden the person would just come through that photo. The outfit would come through, and it was setting up this magical Neptunian type of world where I was taking the reality of these objects, like maybe like Venus conjunct Saturn, when we're talking about earlier, like the idea of beauty or like age or any type of flaws that we have or perceived flaws, or even me perceiving flaws in others, which is not fair and a judgment. I was also very young, but I'd watched all these things come alive. And like she was saying, I'd really fall in love with the people that I took pictures with, and they would be repeat people that would come back. Like one person in general, this girl, Jess, who was my model for quite some time until she moved to Hawaii. And I just loved taking pictures of her. She was such a beautiful, I mean, she still is, but she was such a beautiful soul. And it really just comes through that. So I know this is kind of a side story, whatever, but these are type of Neptunian things. And why I resonate with Annie so much, because it's so true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I really like, it's interesting, this progression that we have, to use this same example. It's like the Venus Saturn conjunction that we have at the beginning of the week with that Aries moon. It's like, okay, do these clothes fit? Like, no, I need to, like, this doesn't fit quite right. Like, this needs to be pinned here.
Yeah.
Be adjusted. Like, I don't know if this is going to work. And then later in the week, we have Mars trine Neptune. And it's like you said, it's like magic. Like, whoa, where did that come from?
Exactly. Like say thrifty Venus Saturn over there spent $3 on a sweater that was questionable. And then you put it on this model that you're like, oh, might take a good picture. And then you get this amazing picture, and then your sweater sells for, $80. Like, it's like all those like things, I love that analogy. It's true. You gotta just move through it, get through the judgment, throw some magic on there, look at it a different way. And then voila.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if that is a bit of the progression that we may be feeling this week. It makes me think of how, and it's ironic, Mel, I've actually, this past semester in school, I've been taking a photography class as a part of my general education. Yeah. And that's, a part of the class is we have to do projects where we put together like an exhibition, and the professor would give us different photographers as inspiration, and she was one of them. And I have found for myself that at first I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I have to put together this big thing. And it feels very intimidating and overwhelming. It feels very like Saturnian. Mm-hmm. And then when I get in there and I start to do it step by step, very Saturn, also like Venus Saturn, step by step, there is like this kind of magic that takes over. And then I start to get into the groove of it. And then I'm like, whoa, this looks really cool. And so I'm wondering if that's kind of the feeling of this week, is where we may feel like that sense of kind of maybe somberness or like, disappointment with something. But then once we get into the week and we get into our groove and we accept reality first and just, get in there and go with it, then some, things kind of open up in a certain way.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that, because let's talk about some specs here, because we have, when this trine happens, we basically have the moon at 29 degrees Aries, which is just right on the edge there. But most importantly, it had just crossed Uranus. So I'm wondering if in the process of the moon crossing Uranus, maybe we will get that freedom, and we will be able to, like we had kind of a breakthrough in the first quarter moon in Aries. Now we might be kind of releasing those kind of Saturnian chains as the moon goes over Uranus, to help free us in a sense and give a little bit of a lighter spirit. Because after that, then the moon's going to move into Taurus and is then going to trine all these planets and kind of solidify that Saturn and that Venus and that where the sun is right now, and kind of give us that stability that a Taurus moon can bring through the rest of, at least through Thursday and Friday. So that's why, once again, I really think that, early on in the week is going to kind of be the stuff we have to move through, and then we're going to stable out around Thursday and Friday. And then we're going to have a fun, Gemini moon weekend where it's, you're going to be busy. Things are going to be kicked up. We're going to be getting ready for the new year and all that kind of stuff. So, so yeah. And then Shawna, we have to talk about Mars. We have to talk, of course, we're talking about Mars, but we have to talk about how Mars is really strong right now, because now that it's in Scorpio, it's in its domicile, it's in its night domicile, which Mars works better at night too. So it's a really strong place for Mars to be. And it's really close to approaching a conjunction with Jupiter and a sextile to Pluto. So I think that this trine is really going to help us act on certain things that can facilitate our growth and breaking down residual gunk that might be in our way to basically move forward in life, and especially with all the things that we've been processing earlier in the week. So what do you think about that Mars, kind of sneaking up to Jupiter and Pluto, and the fact that it's so strong right now?
Yeah. So, it's really interesting because Mars in Scorpio, very strong, very focused,
very focused.
because Mars by nature is about action. It's about, going forward and, meeting things. It's about going after something. Scorpio has a kind of fixed, obsessive kind of quality, and that can be used for better, for worse, but definitely focused for sure. And Scorpio is also about wanting, what is that thing that we want that we're going to go after? And then the fact that it's getting close to Jupiter, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of, we want all the things maybe. At the same time though, Mars right now trining Neptune diffuses things. It can create a certain element of confusion, but it can also create that magic that we're talking about, where things just synchronistically come together. And so, I don't know. I'm curious to see how we feel. I have a sense that because Mars is coming into contact with Neptune, it may soften our focus just a little bit, so that we're not as determined as we have, or we're maybe not nearly as fixated as we have been. It might kind of soften things a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a great time for anything creative, any kind of creative work for sure, because it's in water signs, Scorpio and Pisces are both water signs. And then just the fact that it's coming up to Jupiter as well speaks to a lot of possibility and opportunities that come when we apply ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. This is a time if, music, art, or even if you're feeling active, like any type of swimming, or even a hot tub session,
Yeah, it's gonna
be, I know, especially right now in winter time, it's gonna be a really good outlet. But I'm wondering, since we are talking about we're not talking about fire signs, we're talking about water signs. Since we're talking about water signs, part of me is wondering if, especially having to do with things that have been lining up throughout the week, I'm wondering if by midweek we're maybe, in pure water style, sensing and intuiting certain things. And I'm wondering if it's a time, that we're kind of meant to trust our instincts more and what we're sensing, that kind of Neptunian realm. Or maybe we have to act on our intuition in some way, or we have to trust our gut in order to move forward with, say, those Venus conjunct Saturn issues and that first quarter moon in Aries. And the fact that, Mars trines Neptune right after going over the moon conjuncts Uranus to bring in some new awareness too. So I don't know. I'm just wondering if this is a time to act on our gut in a sense. For certain sensory information that's kind of coming in, that kind of Neptunian realm of whether it's inspiration or that little hunch that guides you somewhere, that it's especially with Scorpio, like I'm wondering if like this is a time to really take this energy and act on spiritual change and growth in some way, because we do have Jupiter almost conjunct Mars. If I do recall, Mars, as it approaches Jupiter, it's also in the zone of squaring the North Node and the South Node right now.
Yep.
So it's in that sensitive zone where I think what we're going to be acting on, because essentially that's what Mars does, is it's assertive. It acts on something. It wells up its courage in order to shape our lives in some way. And a lot of times when we're trying to shape those certain situations, we might, kind of pound through anything that's in our way. Like that's the idea of the warrior and Mars. So I'm wondering if we could just really act on, like I said, that spiritual change, or spiritual growth that we want to see in our lives, especially after we might be coming, the dawn. Well, why can't I think of the damn thing? I'm like darkest before the dawn, not that. The daybreak. Whatever. The sun's rising, people.
The light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, there we go. That sounds good too. Insert your own. But yeah.
Well, and the other thing too that I'm realizing is, so shortly after Mars trines Neptune, the moon will move into Taurus, of course, like we said. And so then by nature, the moon will oppose Mars.
Yes.
And I have a friend who has that aspect natally. She has Mars opposite her moon, and she's like a beast, man. Like this girl, she has so much energy and so much, like, she's also a Capricorn, but she just has so much fire and spirit, and like she can do anything. She will move mountains. And so I'm wondering if that's how we may feel, like we're like, yeah, I can take this on. And I like what you say, Mel, about listening to intuitions, because Scorpio energy, Mars and Scorpio, yeah, like there's this sensing of what's really going on underneath the surface. And so I think especially since during this episode we've talked about, our ability to set boundaries and to navigate through relationships and to navigate through disappointment and loss and that kind of thing. Like there's also this element where we can really tell what's going on underneath the surface. And we can really tell, I have a sense that we'll be able to know like where maybe something is a fantasy or an illusion and maybe not, and to trust ourselves. And if we feel unclear, maybe that's a sign that more information is needed, and to trust our gut, even if we feel unclear about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because, Mars out there just kind of moves forward. It's not one to necessarily stop all the time. And so I'm just wondering if we're like feeling, pretty emotional, especially after getting past the first quarter moon. And, the fact that Mars is in Scorpio, which really highlights, our drive towards what it is that we desire. I'm just hoping, because it's a flowing aspect and what has led up to this moment, that maybe I'm hoping that we don't go against our own good sense in a way, and act on certain desires that are just not healthy for us anymore. Especially when we had Venus conjunct Saturn, and then, we might have spent some time to ourselves by the Aries moon. And we're getting these gut instincts. Cause how many times we're all guilty of it at some level, is you ever have like a gut instinct, but you just go the opposite direction, like, or your gut instinct is not supporting what it is you think you really want.
Yeah.
And then here you are acting against your own, internal radar in a sense. And so I'm just throwing that out there, just because that's a thing too. It's good to act on our desires as long as those desires are not going against, our own common sense here. But let's bring in the tarot cards, because I think we're already kind of segueing into some of that energy. And so we can elaborate on those. But so for Mars trine Neptune, I drew the 7 of Cups as the focus and the 2 of Cups as grounding. And the 7 of Cups is it's so funny because it's a card of, it's a card of illusion. It's a card of confusion, or having too many options on the table, or high expectations of things, or so much so that we can't choose. So I'm wondering if, since we're having such a kind of a Venus-Saturn week, I'm wondering if we should beware of certain high expectations we might have in partnerships, or if we might be putting off the inevitable in certain partnerships, because that Seven of Cups can get a little lazy when it's like looking at all these options. I'm like, oh, well, I'm just going to daydream about all this stuff rather than take any action on it. And so that's kind of like a facet of it in some way, because essentially the two is here to make some type of heartfelt connection. That's the thing. We have the two people with their cups, or like cheersing, or putting their arms around each, and so we have to ask ourselves, are we coming from the heart? Are we trying to pull off an illusion, either to ourselves or to another person? Or, are we deceiving ourselves or another? And so these are some of the things that could come up right now, especially since we seem to have somewhat of a relationship versus the self theme kind of going on this week, I think. But Shawna, what do you think about these two cups put together? These two cups, 9 cups total, but.
Yeah. So this is the thing, is these to me say, okay, where are we fooling ourselves? Is that a possibility? And I say this to everyone, and I say it to myself too, because I'm guilty of this, because sometimes it's so much more complicated when we're talking about relationship as well, whether that's romantic or platonic or family or whatever, because I know there are situations where I have a certain feeling. I'm like, oh, like this doesn't feel right. Or I have this weird feeling, even though I can't put my finger on it. And maybe it's not good for me to do this, but I really want to. So I'm going to do it anyways. And then I get in trouble. Not that I get in trouble, but then like it doesn't feel good at the end of the day, because the thing that I had an intuition about, it's like, oh yeah, like this isn't good for me, or this isn't what I want. And so I think that's what this combination is about, is like, how are we fooling ourselves or not fooling ourselves? And how can we tap in? Like ultimately what I want for us is to tap into this element of fantasy and illusion and magic in a way that is healthy. So to me, this is like, okay, maybe that's coming up in partnership, the 2 of Cups. And how do we like redirect that? And I think that's going to be very different for everyone based on what's actually happening in a person's life. But I would just watch out for that, definitely, like where we're seeing things the way that we want to see them versus how they actually are.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And it's so true, because that's the thing, is like the 7 of Cups, it's like those 7 cups, and that something is popping out of each cup. There's so many choices on the table right now. And it's important to pick the best one for our future growth, especially with Mars, conjunct Jupiter there. Like we're talking about. So it is really time to take off any rose-colored glasses and, see your relations for what they really are. Because ultimately harmony cannot be built on deception. And a lot of times we fool ourselves, and it is not even that we fool each other. We fool each other by fooling ourselves, essentially. So, say if you have too many people you're dating, this is going to come up. Or say you're under an illusion of what is really possible in a partnership or in your life. This can come up too. Or if you've gotten lazy at truly connecting with another person, this can come up right now as well. So, essentially you just got to face your options, because that's part of the 7 of Cups, and then make a choice and commit to that plan. Once you've really felt out and trusted your gut on which would be the best for you. And that's what makes a 7 a spiritual test. All 7s are a spiritual test in some way that we have to get through. So I think that ties in nicely with this Neptune and basically this whole kind of Saturn flavored week. Okay. So some reflection. I just gotta let that out real quick.
That was a doozy.
Some reflection questions to take on your way from Mars trine Neptune. I would ask myself, what are your instincts communicating to you right now? What is it you sense? Do you trust your own gut? I would ask, with many options on the plate and new considerations to choose from, how clear am I about what is truly being offered? Am I seeing things as they really are? And then lastly, I would ask, how can I embrace this time of greater creative action? What is building in my soul that wants to be birthed into artistic form without any expectations?
Nice.
So some questions to take away. Oh my God, Shawna, what did we learn? We've learned
everything.
I'm flabbergasted. Flabbergasted. All right. Well, we learned in this week of December 25th, we are learning that we're reframing our reality in some way. And we're going to have Venus conjunct Saturn first thing in the week on Christmas Day. And we are getting our own reality check, so to speak. And then nearly immediately after, we're going to have our first quarter moon in Aries. And we are moving onward despite what we are working through. And we're going to tap into our independent action in our lives and situations. And then we learned that Mars is going to trine Neptune and is bringing some creative motion into our lives. And so we have to get creative on what it is that we see for ourselves and be discerning of what is best as we take action in going forward. So I know you have an excellent action item to share with our listeners, Shawna, so please do.
Yeah. So this is partly because we're wrapping up the end of the year, and then also partly because, man, this whole week is definitely about confronting reality, right? Like that's what we've titled it, reframing reality. And so I want us to do that in a practical way. So very simply, I want us to write down a list of non-negotiables that we have for ourselves when we're in relationship. And I want to include not just partnership, romantic, but friendships and clients, business partners, coworkers, like the whole shebang. What are our non-negotiable boundaries, essentially? What are our non-negotiable rules that we have for ourselves, how we act in relationship, and then what we allow others to do when they're in relationship to us as well?
I love it. And that's so perfect for Saturn now moving into to Capricorn, because these are all things that are going to be worked through over we're just starting this process. So what perfect timing, especially at the end of this year, so that we can get into 2018 with a greater sense of, where we draw the line, essentially.
Yeah, draw that line. Yeah. And so these may, the things that we write, they may be, things that we work on. So it's not like you have to have, you're like, all right, this is how I'm going to be from now on. It's like, you may kind of work on that kind of thing.
Yeah. But one step at a time, like you said earlier with Venus Saturn.
Exactly. And so, as always, we always love to hear what's going on with everyone. So let us know how you're doing. Another way to get involved with this podcast is to become a patron of the podcast, to show your appreciation and to get those really cool show notes. You can do that by going to feminineprinciplepodcast.podbean.com. And you can connect with us on Facebook and Instagram under Feminine Principle Podcast.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to see your smiling avatar faces on our full moon live that we're going to be doing on Friday, December the 29th at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, which is 8:30 p.m. Universal time, and Saturday the 30th at 6:30 a.m. Nice, bright and early for our Aussies. So mark your calendar and join us, because I think this is going to be a good one, Shawna.
Me too.
we're trying out some new things and we hope you like it. So, so we'll hope to see you then. But until then, if you want to find us, you can find me over at energeticprinciples.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Energetic Principles. And I don't currently have anything that I am offering. So I hope that's enough. I hope that's enough for now. I'm taking the holidays off. So how about you, Shawna? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube under Neo Feminine Astrology. And things that I'm working on now is I have my 2018 moon journal that's available. It's a guide through all of the lunar cycles for the whole year. And I'm doing a women's circle for the first of the year. So that will be in San Diego for my local people. It's on January 2nd. And I'll have more information on about that on my Instagram and Facebook.
Nice. That's going to be great. What a great way to start off the year, especially since we're having like a full moon. That'll be right after. It'll be when it's it's waning a little, which is very, very nice for that type of thing. So can't recommend that moon journal enough. What a perfect way to start off the year. So definitely go check that out. But all right. Okay. So any last words for our listeners?
Yeah, sending lots of love, and thank you so much for all of your support and well wishes. We appreciate you. And if you enjoy this podcast, definitely recommend it to a friend, share the love, and leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or Facebook. That helps us out a lot to reach even more people.
Yes, because the more, those things actually matter. People care what other people think. Go figure. So yes. So you can find us there. And we do have our, subscribe to Podbean, and you can get those future episodes as they come out, which is midnight on Sundays, Pacific time. So every week we got something just waiting for you to take a listen to, and for ourselves to listen to. Oh my God, I listened to it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's thank you, past me, for helping future me. Oh my God. So all right, everyone, I am wishing you a wonderful week as well, and we thank you so much for tuning in. So until next time, or should I say next year, may the stars be with you.
Namaste.